Welcome to the Marketing AI SparkCast, where AI meets modern marketing. Hosted by Abby Varma, a global leader in marketing, AI, and innovation, each episode brings you real conversations with leaders putting AI to work in strategy and execution. This episode is brought to you by Spark Novus and the Marketing AI Pulse community. Here's your host, Abby Varma.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the second episode of the Marketing AI Pulse Monthly Brief. This is where we curate stories that may be relevant for CMOs and marketing leaders to keep their finger on the pulse of marketing and AI. This is an extension of our Marketing AI Pulse community by the same name. If you are not familiar with the community, you can check out marketingaipulse.com. And with me, I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming my partner in crime, the lovely, as always, Matt Sear. Matt, welcome to our second episode.
Good morning, Mr. Varma. How are you today?
I'm doing good, man. How are you? Sounds like you're a little under the weather and you're powering through.
Yeah, I've been fighting some sort of a goblin here for the last week or so, but yeah, can't AI never sleeps, Abby. So we gotta keep on pushing.
There you go. This episode, Matt, we have a lot of cool things to talk about. And one thing which is top of mind is advertising in the LLMs. You know, all these different LLMs have sort of a distinct take on what that really means for their business. So ChatGPT, as you know, is all in on the free version and the low cost version, and are already testing advertising here in the US. Anthropic had those series of ads that they made. We're talking about not wanting to advertise, and now Perplexity pulls back from advertising. So unpack this for us and tell us what it is and why that is relevant for marketing folks.
Yeah, definitely. It's been an interesting few months in this area, right? OpenAI announced maybe 2 months ago that they were going to start testing ads within platform. That brought some immediate backlash, not least of which were the Super Bowl ads that Anthropic released that you mentioned, which were, if you saw them live or have seen them since, they were really well done. And I think did a nice job of sort of creating some space between Anthropic's approach to this and OpenAI's approach to this. And I think what you're seeing, especially now with this Perplexity announcement, just in the last few days, is sort of an emergence of two different camps here when it comes to monetization. On the one hand, you have OpenAI and Google, which are going down the reach path, which both of them are testing ads in their LLMs and trying to monetize in sort of, I would say, traditional ways. The other path, though, is what both Perplexity and Anthropic are doing, which is what I would put in the trust category, right? So you're seeing this emergence of a reach versus trust separation here. And I think what Perplexity is saying in their announcement about, and we have to remember, Perplexity has had ads, in context ads already. And what they're saying is we're actually now going to stop doing that and really just rely on people seeing Perplexity as a place of trusted information. Their, announcement came along with the note saying, essentially, we don't want people to be unsure if what they're seeing is a true result or a advertiser sponsored result. And so that idea of trust driving is, I think, really important. And as we all know, I think Anthropic really has placed its bets very much in the trust category, as well as we saw separate but related topic, their sort of clash with the Pentagon recently, Anthropic really doubling down on trust. And so I think, as we think about this from a CMO perspective, I don't think we're in a world where we can choose either or, right? Trust versus reach. I don't think we can sort of carve off any of these LLMs and not pay attention to them or not use them in our marketing. But when I think about what CMOs should be considering here, I think there's a lot to think about. And I think you really need to consider having strategies for both the trust layer and the reach layer. And that really means experimentation with OpenAI's ad platform, means experimentation with the way Google is extending their long history of advertising and approach to it. But also really leaning into these trust-based platforms, right? And treating each one in the way that it is most effective. And, I think that users are starting to really look for them to behave. So fascinating split starting to take place. Who knows where this will go in another 6 months, but been an interesting couple of months here.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the way I'm thinking about it is almost like there's an organic portion of it, which is, all your LLMs. You obviously want to make sure from a brand discovery standpoint, your brand shows up in all LLMs, but of particular focus with Claude and with Perplexity, right? Because they're not doing advertising. And then with Google and ChatGPT, where they will be doing advertising, having both an organic and a paid media strategy for those LLMs, sounds like, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's like with everything else with AI right now is it's too early to make final bets on anything, and I think understanding how these platforms are handling the two different paths, I think is really important so that your brand can show up in ways that feel relevant and interesting. And again, not ignoring one or the other, but having an approach that makes sense within the context of your brand. We'll talk in a couple minutes here about another platform that's kind of a bridge between these two strategies. But your point is exactly right. Is lay some chips on each side of that table as we move forward here.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to get your take personally on, do you feel if you see advertising on Gemini and then on ChatGPT, and as long as it is labeled and not intrusive to the search results, does that hurt your sensibilities?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I feel a couple different ways about it. One, I do think it impacts the experience, right? We have for the last, however long it's been since ChatGPT launched, 2.5, 3 years, I guess, have had a pretty unencumbered experience when it comes to these LLMs. We haven't been, faced with advertising and intrusive experiences around that. And so I think any shift away from that feels different and it feels a little bit, maybe not alarming, but certainly unique. And so, yes, as I've experienced ads, I've experienced them in Perplexity, I've experienced them in ChatGPT, I've experienced them in Gemini. It does, in my opinion, sort of take away a little bit from that feeling of unencumbered experience in search and conversation. I'm not naive to the fact that they have to monetize these things. But I guess, I go back to where Sam Altman started maybe 2 years ago, where he thought or where he said he was hopeful that there would be new models emerge for supporting LLMs and sort of moving away from the old school Google model. And so it's kind of ironic that OpenAI is really leaning into the paid model at a time when I think there are probably other ways that we can do this.
Very cool. Yeah, we'll see how long Perplexity and Anthropic kind of hold off, because I feel that when it comes to monetization through advertising, it's just a matter of time. I mean, I feel Anthropic with Claude has more of a intentional strategy about it because they're going after the B2B space and their margins are bigger, their bets are stronger in terms of that B2B. So they're not looking at advertising from a B2C standpoint and using that as a model. Perplexity, I'm not entirely sure about what their strategy is, to be honest. So I think that is something that we'll watch. I wouldn't be surprised if they get scooped up by a larger company and, Microsoft or whoever. So let's see how that all shapes out.
Yeah, Perplexity has been interesting to watch because I think you put your finger on it, right? I'm not clear what their strategy is either, right? I mean, it's yes, we're doing ads, no, we're not doing ads. Yes, we're going to launch all these expensive paid models, and but we're also going to offer some free services. They're doing a lot in the sort of one-click shopping area, partnering with different, retail brands, related, marketing within their platforms as well. So they feel a little bit like a thousand directions all at once, to be honest. But I think Anthropic has been steadfast in their approach to trust, and I think OpenAI has flip-flopped a little bit, and of course Google has always been about that paid advertising. So a couple of these players are really focused on clear strategies, and others I think are still trying to find their way. So speaking of finding their way, Abby, I want to talk about lobsters. Are you ready to talk about lobsters today?
I know where this is headed, Matt.
Or this? Okay. So if folks are paying attention to, all things AI, you will have seen some red and blue lobsters appearing in your feeds a few weeks ago. And there's been a lot of activity related to those lobsters that Abby's going to talk through with us here and tell us the very latest about what's going on with our friends with OpenClaw.
Yeah. So, for those of you who are not kind of cued in on this, so November last year, there's an Austrian developer, Peter Steinberger, who released an open source AI agent, and he called it Claudebot. And then, of course, the folks at Anthropic with their LLM Claude got a little heartburn about that, and then he renamed it Moltbot, and then ultimately OpenClaw. So they're all the same thing, and OpenClaw is what it is right now. And unlike traditional chatbots, OpenClaw could take action. You could install it on a Mac Mini, you could execute commands, manage files, interact with applications, automate workflows, all on your behalf, right? And the growth was explosive. So in under 90 days, it was almost 200,000 GitHub stars, becoming one of the kind of fastest growing open source projects in history and gaining hundreds of contributors. And why are we talking about this in the February episode? Because Steinberger announced that he was joining OpenAI to work on personal agents, right? So he and Sam Altman got together. OpenClaw remains an open source project. And the move sort of underscored the fact that all major AI labs were sort of investing serious talent and money into systems that can take actions and not just generate text. So it created all kinds of buzz around the industry because it was really performative in terms of the doing part. There were lots of security concerns, and there was also something called Molt Book, which was Reddit style social media platforms where all these open clawbots apparently were getting together. So it got a lot of news. Some of the things were pretty wild that the agents got together and came up with a religion and they swindled their owners out of money. And how much of that is true and how much of that is not, who's to say? But all this was a little wild and was kind of indicative of if this becomes real in the future, what the future may hold. So exciting, but also a little creepy and scary at the same time. And I was just sort of fascinated by what this may mean for marketing folks, right? And in a way, for all blue collar roles, if you're in front of a computer and doing things, AI is moving beyond helping you write copy, right? If you're a marketer, we all use ChatGPT to write copy or ideate or what have you. But systems like OpenClaw show that AI can really take actions inside the tools that you could use. So with OpenClaw, you can connect with it to a WhatsApp or whatever and talk to it and give it instructions, and then it would go execute that on your behalf. So imagine if this all works out fine, that means from a CMO standpoint, this could mean building campaigns, building reports, updated segments, coordinated tasks across various marketing platforms with a lot less manual effort than what, marketers and campaign folks may be used to. And, when execution speeds up, clarity really becomes the advantage. And that's where, this is highlighting a world where clear goals, defined audiences, stronger creative briefs, the right kind of position is going to matter more than the actual grunt work of execution. Because if inputs are vague, AI will simply execute a vague strategy faster and amplified, which is sort of dangerous. So in a weird sort of way, while AI is going to focus and make execution easier, it's fascinating to see that it would almost focus and force the human part of a marketing strategy, where you want to make sure your goals, your tastes, your judgment, and all those things need to be stronger. What's your feeling on this whole open claw news and noise, I should say?
Yeah, and noise is a good word for it because it's kind of interesting to me that this one bubbled to the top and made so many waves. I mean, I think there were the sort of wild headlines that you described about the social network that they created on their own, and how they were supposedly communicating amongst themselves and things like that, and that to me is probably what immediately made this thing break through. But it was a little surprising to me that something that is essentially an agentic solution would get this much attention, right? Because we talk about agents all the time. We talk about the automation of work. We talk about, how much, autonomy are we willing and able to give these agents? I did a talk at the Marketing AI Institute's AI for Agencies Summit a couple of weeks ago on agents and building agents. And there were comments that were running through the thread as I was talking about, isn't what he's talking about really just, workflow automations, right? And in some cases that is true, right? I mean, there are things that, are workflow automations, but when you string those things together into something that not feels, acts agentically and acts on your behalf, that's where that real power and that real unlock becomes or comes through. But interestingly, like we've been talking about agents and the sort of guardrails and opportunities for, the better part of a year or more now. So I was just interested to see why this one broke through. I'd love to hear your thoughts on why OpenClaw slash Moltbot slash all the other things that it's been called in its short life. Why, in your opinion, did this one break through when some of the others maybe haven't?
I think it was just because of the fact that it was unrestrained. It was so easy for the technical folks, maybe not yet for just the common person who's not a developer, but it
Yeah.
was super easy where you just install it on a Mac Mini and then it has completely unfettered access to all your systems and it was executing and talking and some of the demos, I have not installed it myself and played with it, but I have interacted with it with a friend who had it installed. So it's pretty wild where you can just give it instructions that has logic. And the fact that it is not kind of controlled or constrained in any way, I think is what people really found valuable because you could really kind of, you could send email, it could do things for you. And so I think that leap from just using AI to write things to actually having AI do things in a very tangible, visceral sort of way was, I think, what got everybody's attention. And I think the funny thing is that it was unfettered access to your systems, and obviously there were a lot of security issues that came out of that. But to me, from a CMO standpoint, that is also a wake-up call that when it comes to your AI strategy, like guardrails are no longer optional, right? If an autonomous system, imagine can access your CRM data, can
Mm,
access your paid media budgets or content libraries, and if it messes up and mistakes can scale quickly, like we know
yeah.
AI is not perfect by any stretch, right? So CMOs need to define, those guardrails, define permissions, what is allowed, what is not allowed, visibility into what the system is doing. But then the other part of it is recognition of the fact that if your marketing workflows and processes are confusing and messy, then all AI is going to do is just amplify that. So, clean
Yep.
data becomes a performance multiplier. You want to make sure you have well-structured segments, consistent naming, reliable customer data that allow AI to perform intelligently and not just have any sort of agentic system kind of run the streets wild, just connecting to whatever system and doing whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the next major frontier, I think, here in marketing, but in AI writ large is the impact that agents are truly going to have once they're able to really do deliver on the promise that we've been hearing about for a while. So yeah, agree. Fascinating stuff.
So let's switch gears, Matt, and talk a little bit about Reddit. So
Yeah.
Reddit is sort of, the single biggest repository of human commentary, as
Yep.
I understand it. And a lot of AI, LLM search engines are referencing Reddit in their indexes in order to make sure that they can really examine how, humans are commenting on various topics, subreddits and what have you. but Reddit is really positioning itself as the antidote to AI driven shopping. Unpack for the listeners what that means and what are the implications for CMOs.
Yeah, it's a fascinating article. We can share the link. We talked a few minutes ago about the reach versus trust strategies that, OpenAI and Google and Anthropic and Perplexity are taking on now. And in a lot of ways, Reddit right now is playing in the yes and strategy category. They are doing both reach and trust, and doing it, I think, in a pretty smart way, that bridges the two of those. And we'll see ultimately how that plays out. But at its core, what's happening, everybody knows Reddit is the place where people go and share thoughts and opinions on the most, minute of minutia. But it's a place where people get together to share, thoughts, opinions, ideas, that real human content that you were talking about a minute ago. And so there's, obviously a natural push, certainly on the side of the frontier model companies, to want to be engaged with Reddit. And last year, or maybe late 2024, OpenAI struck a deal with Reddit, very lucrative deal, something along the lines of 60 or $70 million a year, to use Reddit content there in their responses within their LLMs. And so, at that moment, it was like, well, is Reddit selling out here? Are they going to the big LLM company here? And what does that mean for the community of Reddit and, the sort of culture of Reddit? And I think that's, probably still a little bit of an open question, but they are also very actively, as you said, positioning themselves as the antidote to AI driven shopping in a way that is bringing that human connection and that trust and that reliability very much front and center. And so, I think brands are needing to start looking at Reddit as a really, I think, an interesting place that they have to have a unique approach to, right? Because on the one hand, you want to show up in a legitimate way as a brand within some of these communities. You want to be seen as contributing to these communities and making an impact in a positive way. But you also want to, rely, or you also want to focus on the realities of your business and needing to drive, revenue and things like that. And so I would say that as CMOs, start to look at the LLMs, traditional, web searches, and then Reddit as this sort of, center of all of that, is, you know, have an approach to Reddit, right? Pay attention to what's happening there. See what people are talking about in the areas that matter to you and to your business. Become a real and relevant part of those conversations. Don't just use them as straight marketing channels, because it will get sniffed out. We've all seen Reddit threads that go south when somebody tries to start selling something. So go there and be a legitimate connector and contributor, but also pay attention to, how the information that's being created there, the conversations that are being had there, are being brought into the LLMs and to the answers that they provide. So, it's a unique place. Reddit has always been a unique place, and it continues to be so in the age of AI. And so I would just say, pay some attention to those parts of that community that really are most relevant to you and your business.
So with the LLM sort of indexing Reddit threads, or Reddit data,
Yeah.
to train their LLMs on that. So essentially, from a marketing standpoint, what that really means is that you want to make sure that your brand is present on Reddit.
Yep.
Like you said, not in sort of a selling sort of way, but authentic conversations, making sure that as a brand you are contributing, and definitely the Reddit community will make sure that, if it sounds salesy or kind of promotional in any way, you'll get tagged, flagged, and kind of voted down. So definitely be careful about that. But really, in a lot of ways, this is about brand credibility, making sure that you're kind of facilitating dialogue and making sure that your brand shows up in positive light, and which then in turn makes sure that the LLMs are indexing that information and then show up in brand discovery when people do AI search, right? So in a lot of ways is sort of PR-ish, right, Matt?
Yeah, it's you put your finger right on it, Abby. I think, right, it's there's a PR component to this. There's a, playing nice in the sandbox and being a good contributing member of society. It's about making sure that you are visible as a brand. But what's really, what's fascinating to me about AI, increasingly what we're seeing is that AI answers and AI itself trust conversations about brands more than they trust brand content, right? So if someone's talking well about your brand, it's like the old days of, like, when you'd go to Open Table, or, some of these sort of community driven apps where you would get legitimate research or responses or reviews about a brand. That makes you as a consumer feel like, okay, this is a legitimate place. I'm willing to give this place a try. And I think we've seen a big shift away from that, where people are, sort of review bombing these sites. And so those have frankly lost a lot of their trust. But AI at the moment, these LLM results, to your point, really care about true and trusted conversation. They're not interested necessarily in your branded content, talking about yourself, pounding the chest about how great you are. They want to know that you are seen as a legitimate player in the space. And I think that line is a really important one for marketers to walk, which is, yes, you want to promote your brand. Yes, you want to be visible in the communities that matter to you, but you have to do it in a way that both the community and the AI are going to see as valuable and beneficial to the overall community.
Yeah, it's almost like adding the value of human opinion as a significant kind of weight to LLM findability, making sure that, in the list of all the sources that these LLMs sort of factor in whichever way, making sure that authentic human dialogue is a key part of it.
Yeah, totally. And it goes back to that word that we started with, right? Which is trust. Authenticity, as you just said, trust, human connection. In many ways, those things are more important than ever in the age of AI. And so, exactly as you said, really, really leaning into those things that connect people and create community, as you do so well with, the Marketing AI Pulse community. That kind of thing matters, in my opinion, more than ever. All right, Abby, on to our next topic, which is a topic that is near and dear to your heart, which is SaaS, something that you are very well known for. Oh, I'm sorry. This says SaaS, not SaaS. Sorry, this is a different kind of SaaS than the Abby SaaS. We're going to talk here about the SaaS apocalypse that has been making the rounds in the world of AI here in the last month or so. Why don't you tell us about the SaaS apocalypse and tell it in a sassy Abby way, if you don't mind?
Thank you, Matt. I would expect nothing less from you, my friend. But yeah, I mean, early February, Anthropic introduced advanced automation tools. That's where it all started, right? It had advanced automation tools and plugins for its Cloud Cowork platform, which included like legal automation features. And investors saw this as proof that AI could really handle complex tasks normally managed by enterprise software. And that shift in perception, or that sort of correlation between what Claude came out with and what does that mean for enterprise software, resulted in a belief that AI might weaken the traditional SaaS market and SaaS subscription model. And the traders reacted quickly, selling off software stocks and erasing almost hundreds of billions of dollars in market value in a single day, right? In mid-February, the software sector lost more than like $1 trillion in value. And you had companies like Salesforce and Adobe and Intuit, HubSpot all dropped as market sentiment sort of moved from more of a predictable growth to a disruption risk. And that decline was driven less by earnings results, but more by a belief that, AI could really reduce that long-term demand for these traditional subscription software. And this is early February, but since then, Anthropic has also impacted other industries, right? So it came up with, cybersecurity and the fact that it could scan your code and identify issues, and all the cyber stocks were getting impacted. And then I believe this week it said that, hey, we can help you scan your COBOL code, which is code programming language in the 50s. And that resulted in the IBM stock tanking because, that's a significant part of what IBM does is take sort of all these legacy systems that exist on that code base, which IBM services in terms of upgrading those. So a lot of what Anthropic's coming up with has impacted this space, but with the SaaS market, it was quite a bit of chaos. Obviously, you can imagine MarTech is sort of a key part of, that SaaS space. And it was kind of a wake up call, but not in terms of the stock portion of it. So it's not like a stock story, but more of highlighting a strategy story when it comes to marketing technologies for marketers and CMOs, right? So your MarTech stack is a strategic decision. It's not just an operational one. What that means is that every time you come up for renewal, you should really be kind of questioning, do you really need that tech stack or that specific piece of technology? What are you paying for? Is there a role that AI can play in whatever that technology is trying to achieve? Is there an opportunity to consolidate or enhance leveraging AI? And what are the other new AI native players in the market for that? So the value conversation changes, right? So AI is increasing productivity, and leadership is going to expect that to show up in faster campaigns, in a stronger pipeline, or improved margins. So you need to point to tangible impact of these technologies and not just the fact that it's doing some activity, right? So technology alone is not going to differentiate you. Everybody has the same access to AI-based technology. The real advantage comes from data or brand strength or positioning clarity and the speed of decision making, right? Like that to me is democratizing your ability from a marketing execution standpoint. There used to be a time when you had these big enterprise companies with more sophisticated software that would help you achieve more goals, but now maybe some of the SMBs can have access to the same pieces of technology and really achieve the same level of scale, so that differentiation becomes less about technology, right? And then vendor selection comes at more of a risk in the world of AI, right? So some platforms are deeply integrating AI into their sort of core platforms, and others are doing sort of AI washing, and it's more at a surface level. So that's where CMOs need to understand which MarTech vendors are building the durable advantage into that platform, right? So it's
Yeah.
sort of brought to light that essentially CMOs and marketing leaders should really be looking at the world of MarTech a little bit differently. And we spoke about this in our last episode as well. Like you can't now start thinking about each of these different technologies in sort of an isolated way. You have to think about it in a cohesive orchestrated system. And it wasn't like that concept is new. It was always there even in the world prior to AI, but now with AI, with technologies like MCP, you have a real opportunity to really making sure that various elements of your martech stack are working more cohesively and in more of an orchestrated way.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's interesting. You and I have worked, clients who are facing the realities of the MarTech stack every day, right? Who are spending significant amounts of their budget, time, and staff energy on managing the tech stack, making decisions about should we re-up or not. Right. I think you and I have each individually and collectively helped people think through some of these decisions, but there probably are CMOs and other marketers who are listening to this right now who are saying, Abby, this is great. Yeah, $1 trillion worth of value got wiped out, and this is a big picture thing. And I understand that this is a strategy thing, but the fact of the matter is that I'm sitting here today having to make decisions and bets on tools and technologies that are shifting under our feet on a moment's notice. Can you share just some thoughts on how marketers can make near-term decisions at the same time where they have to be thinking big picture, longer term, fully knowing that a decision they make today may become sort of irrelevant in 6 to 12 months if that technology goes out of date or gets purchased by somebody else. But like, what are some tangible things that people can do in the minute to help them, proceed in a pretty complex environment?
Yeah, great question. So first off, my first suggestion is don't be the cat chasing the laser pointer, right? Like it's very easy these days. There's a new pieces of technology coming out every single day, and it's all great to experiment. I mean, stay tuned, stay informed, and the capabilities and what people are talking about. But some of the more deeply embedded marketing tools need time and maturity. So don't just jump on the very first thing you see and is really cool. Really take your time to evaluate why are you wanting a change to begin with? And what is it that you're looking for that your current system does not provide? And then in seeing what's the value that, whatever AI system that has caught your eye is bringing to the table. Is it faster? Is it cheaper? Is it saving you time? Is it adding productivity? And all of those are the type of things that people would look at. In the current environment, I'm seeing there's a lot of hype, and it would behoove us to take time to really dive in deeper and not get sort of enamored by all the hype and really, roll back the covers, make sure that you're evaluating the MarTech for the right reasons. So that's number one. Number two is, which is almost like a more foundational piece, which has nothing to do with MarTech. It's like, what are the goals you're after, right? Like whatever strategic goals that have been identified in your marketing strategy, making sure that any technology exploration and investment needs to be part of that overarching strategy. So at a very foundational level, if you're really looking at, hey, we got to make sure, we are reevaluating our CRM or our digital asset management system or our marketing automation platform and what have you, that those are things that are going to move the needle on your overarching goals. And some of this is foundational infrastructure, but again, making sure that you're taking it on for the right reasons. And then finally, I think I would say, governance wise, making sure that how these technologies are really treating your data is a very key piece of it, right? Is it secure? Are they training their models on your data? Is it compliant with all the SOC 2 and all these different standards that exist? So making sure that you are not opening yourself to risks that come from these technologies. And I can tell you a lot of these AI MarTech vendors are cutting corners in order to, go to the market faster. In some cases, their marketing motions and go-to-market motions almost precede the technology actually being available because they're talking about it, they're drumming up demand because they don't want to fall behind, and that technology is not fully baked or is in beta or whatever. And those are the things that sort of get flushed out very early on in early demos. I mean, you and me have been part of demos where we've seen some of these things. So yeah, so that's my take on how marketing leaders should sort of traverse the new wild world of AI based martech.
It is a wild world, wild, wild west, no question.
All right, Matt. Next topic for us was, we spoke about Reddit, where there was a lot of, human and authentic content. But on the other end of the spectrum is AI trying to manufacture public sentiment, right?
Yeah.
There was some reporting from Futurism. Tell us what the reporting was and what does that mean for marketing folks?
Yeah, so this is fascinating, Abby, right? Because one of the things that's so powerful about AI is its ability to scale and to do things quickly and to do things at a scale and at a pace that I think really, obviously humans can't keep up with. But, there are positive sides of that, and there are, of course, potentially downsides to that. And we saw an interesting example of one possible downside in the last week, which is related to some legislation that was being considered in California. The goal of the legislation was to, over time, phase out natural gas appliances with the goal of reducing the environmental impact over time. Of course, natural gas is not great for the environment. And so they were trying to get these appliances taken out of use. But what happened was a technology called CivaClick got involved. And CivaClick describes itself as a disruptive digital advocacy software. And essentially, what that is it's a way to create a response at scale. They in this case have blurred the line between civic participation and what we would think of as sort of manufactured consensus. This is creating a large volume of responses using AI. What's a little bit unclear as you read this article is how much of that response was genuine human response that was amplified by the AI, and how much of that response was actually created by the AI. So to give you a sense of it, so CivicClick, what it does is it can fill forms out really quickly and easily for people. It can create emails at scale and essentially get people to respond at volume in ways that make it seem as if there's a groundswell of support, when in fact it might just be the technology itself driving scale. And so ultimately in California here, this legislation was overturned and didn't get passed. And so it really is starting to raise some of these questions around sort of how do you use AI in positive ways to get people to engage in important topics, but you're not also using it to, persuade people at scale infinitely in ways that could be perceived as negative. And, maybe seen as sort of putting your thumb on the scale, if you will. It also to me raises an interesting question around one of the threads that has sort of gone through our entire conversation today is around authenticity, trust, right? And I think that a technology like this, this is one example, but the scale that AI can create really makes something like authenticity that much more scarce and that much more valuable. And so I think there's a real lesson here for the communicators out there, the marketers out there, to find the balance of how they're using these technologies to benefit what they're doing, but not to do so in a way that undercuts their authenticity.
So, what does that really mean? Like, from a CMO standpoint, you want to make sure you're authentic and you're not really using AI to, like you alluded to earlier, manufacture sentiment or manufacture engagement.
Yeah, I think we all know, and you mentioned it in the last segment, that that we've moved beyond the place where AI is writing emails for people. What I think we haven't moved past yet is the place where AI can create communication at scale, right? And create massive volume of emails, of social media content, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think marketers and CMOs in particular really need to be cognizant of taking advantage of the scale that's possible and the speed that's possible with AI, but not leaning so fully and so heavily into it that you're undercutting your brand's authenticity and the trust that people place in
Mm,
you, right? So if
mm.
you're able to say like, hey, you know what, we could send out, you know, 100 emails a day at scale to a million different people, man, that's going to get annoying awfully fast. And I think it's going to immediately start to undercut the value of your brand. And so I think it's sort of like a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah.
It's use these technologies in ways that are beneficial, but don't use them in ways that undercut the way people view your brand and experience your brand.
So don't spin up 100 Reddit agents posting on behalf of your brand to make you sound, to make your brand sound positive, and because that feedback is not authentic, sounds like.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was looking the other day at, so I'm a New England Patriots fan. Unfortunately, my Patriots didn't perform as well in the Super Bowl as I was hoping they would. But in advance of the Super Bowl, I was looking online to buy a Patriots sweatshirt. And I went to a website and I looked at the comments and the reviews that were there. And it had, I want to say tens of thousands of positive reviews, and I thought, okay, this is cool. I'm going to read through some of these reviews and see what they're saying about the quality of the sweatshirt and, the thickness of it and the sizing and all the stuff we look for. And as I read through these comments, it became very clear that each and every one of these reviews had been created by AI because they all basically followed the same pattern of describing the quality of the sweatshirt, the speed with which it was delivered, and the value that they felt like they got from the purchase. And so as you read through these, and you're reading literally dozens of these after one another, it became clear to me that this was something that had been produced at scale by AI. And
Yeah.
so when I look at what the CiviClick example, there's a lot of similarities there, which is yes, you can do this at scale, but it's going to become very clear to your audience very quickly that it's not real. And the impact for me personally in that purchasing moment was I'm actually not going to purchase a sweatshirt from this website because if they've got all these AI driven BS reviews, that makes me question their brand at its core, whether it's truly a good value and good quality or not. And so I think there's something to be said here about scaling and using that power in tangible ways, but using it also cautiously because people will sniff it out pretty quickly.
So what does that mean for CMOs? Governance, transparency within their brand or for their brand within their team?
Yeah, I would say governance. I would say caution. I would say paying attention to the human qualities of your brand, and having the things that matter to you as a brand be articulated in how you market to the world, right? So again, if we talk back to the Reddit example, it's taking part in the conversations in legitimate ways and not just using Reddit as a platform for your marketing and for your branded content, but as a way for authentic connection and communication. And I would say in the same vein, if you're going to use AI to help you amplify your brand or a message or a campaign, do it sparingly and do it strategically in ways that don't undercut the way people see you.
Makes sense.
All right, Abby, we are moving on to our final topic for this month. Interesting story coming out of New York State late last year. The state of New York passed a law requiring clear disclosure when an ad uses AI. And I think this is probably something that most of the marketers out there wrestle with every day. I know I hear about this from my clients, and I know, in fact, you and I have worked on a project where we helped a client make very clear guidance and guardrails around the use of AI in their advertising and marketing efforts. So tell us a little bit more about what's going on in New York and what impact this is going to have for marketers everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, like you said, in late December, New York passed a law requiring clear disclosure when an ad uses AI generated human-like spokesperson, right? So, AI avatars, digital influencers, synthetic presenters, basically that look like real people and could reasonably be mistaken for a real human being. The law takes effect in June 9th, which is why we are talking about it in our February episode right now, making sure that there's a lot of work going on for brands to prepare for this before the law sort of kicks in, which means that ads shown in New York to New York audiences must include a quote unquote conspicuous disclosure if a synthetic human is used in the actual advertising. And honestly, New York isn't the only state. You know, California, Massachusetts, Georgia all have, or it's in the works with additional AI transparency and disclosure proposals emerging. And there's more states that are thinking and planning that sort of the strategy of making sure that you are letting everybody know when people in your ads are AI generated. So what that means for CMOs is accountability has really shifted to marketing departments. So AI is not just a performance lever, it is now brand and compliance exposure in the market, meaning CMOs need to own whether AI driven content claims targeting synthetic personas, people could mislead customers and erode trust. Here we go. The trust word pops up again,
Yep.
Matt, right? And you know, also, I feel that most companies have some sort of AI governance and policies handed down to marketing departments. They're written for internal use, and they're written from a legal and compliance and IT infrastructure standpoint. But I feel that marketers really need to think about their own governance, not just an enterprise handout that they inherit. I'm not saying that's not important, but there needs to be one more layer of marketing defined governance, which would apply to marketing employees, to agencies, to contractors, right? Where you have marketing specific rules for what is allowed, what is high risk, who approves what do you need to disclose, and those sort of things. And it's not just that, there's also a lot of cases going on at the federal level where FTC, the scrutiny of deceptive practices, where you want to make sure that as a marketing department, you are disclosing very clearly. Now, the New York law doesn't, it says conspicuous disclosure. What that means is TBD and how you interpret that. But regardless, this is something you can't really, ignore. And me personally, I think that's a good thing. I think it's good to let people know when you're using AI, especially when it comes to video content where you are clearly indicating that this is not a real person. So I think that's a good thing. And I've seen in a lot of ads where they sort of user generated content much along the lines of the previous story we were talking about, where especially if you have AI generated personas doubling up as quote unquote users of your software, endorsing your product, and the whole premise is all synthetic. Again, that sort of definitely erodes trust in your brand and will sort of question how people perceive your brand. What's your take on this, Matt?
Yeah, I think there's a lot here, probably a topic for another day, but I'm fascinated by the separation of, or the emerging challenge between state and federal guidance and guardrails and laws when it comes to AI. There's a real power struggle that's going on between the state and federal governments right now in that regard that will play itself out over time. But the thing that immediately comes to mind for me as we think about, how CMOs and other marketers can think about this is, again, something you and I have counseled our clients on, which is it's best to start somewhere when it comes to governance and guardrails and rules than to wait for this situation to settle itself out and then, sort of create a final list of perfect rules and regulations. All of this stuff is moving too fast. It's changing too quickly. And, one of my favorite phrases in the age of AI is don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I would say that what I like about what New York is doing, what California has been doing, is that they are starting somewhere. They are putting a stake in the ground. Yes, that stake is going to move. Yes, things are going to evolve over time, but they're starting somewhere. And I would really just say to marketers out there that it's so important to start somewhere in your own creation of guardrails, guidelines, and governance because, to your point, the responsibility is going to lie with the CMO if there's an issue. And so, yes, your policy might need to change 3 months after you release it, but at least you have something that you can rely on, that your teams can rely on, and that your customers can rely on. And so, that to me is an area that I feel very passionately about, which is start somewhere, evolve as you need to. And I know this is something on your side you obviously agree with and counsel your clients in as well. But any immediate tips you would give people to, to not letting the perfect be the enemy of good? How can people get started with something if they haven't yet?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to marketing specific governance, I say, people get really overwhelmed by that, but I think I have a more simplistic approach to that where I tell people to think about it in terms of sort of three pillars like input, output, disclosure. So, input is be sensible about what kind of stuff you're putting into AI. Don't download your Salesforce data in a CSV and upload it into ChatGPT and start asking questions, right? That is not something that you should be doing. So be very clear and have a documented policy on rules for input of what you're putting into AI. Some of that is going to come from your IT and your compliance people, but also have a way to think about this in terms of marketing. Output would be making sure that you are establishing governance and rules around what is a human obligation of what needs to be reviewed when things come out of AI. We know AI hallucinates, so fact check it. Make sure it is compliant with your brand voice and your brand values. If you work in regulated industries, make sure it is compliant with all those rules and those sort of things, right? So making sure that you're not just taking output AI output at face value. And the third thing, which is sort of the core crux of the New York AI disclosure law, is disclosure, is where you're telling people where AI was used, how it was used, and you're telling people about it in the correct way. Like there's on a scale of a 0 to 100, you can completely skip disclosure, which I would not recommend. But then you can be very subtle about it. You can have it, in fine print on a video or whatever. But we are seeing more and more where as the law starts to catch up with the pace of AI innovation, the governments are going to start really mandating how these disclosures are done so that people can start really trusting that AI content. And obviously, this episode is all about marketing, but think about the value of that in society at large. Like, what if you start seeing commercials about politicians and all that kind of stuff, right? Where you want to make sure there's elections coming up. You want to make sure you can trust some of this content and make sure that, people don't assume things based on whatever AI based storytelling that is completely synthetic, aka fake, that that is processed by people. So
Yep. Yeah, great advice. Good stuff. Great way to wrap it up.
yeah, absolutely. That is a wrap, Matt. Thank you very much. Enjoyed this episode and appreciate your time. Hope you feel a little bit better.
Thank you. Yep, we're getting there. I'll be all good. But yeah, looking forward to catching back up in March and seeing what's happening in the world of AI.
Awesome. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Be sure to follow Matt and me on LinkedIn. If you want to check out more episodes of the podcast, you can go to marketingaisparkcast.com. If you want to follow the Marketing AI Pulse community, you can go to marketingaipulse.com. Till next time, thank you very much.
Thanks for listening. Big thanks to Spark Novus and the Marketing AI Pulse community. You can join the community at marketingaipulse.com.